everything that trans people want the general public of is happening, and it's going to get much worse. But instead of being like, you were actually right, okay, let me fight with you, they're like, no, actually, it's a good thing that you are being brought to justice. Finally, people are no longer putting up with that pronoun nonsense. And it's like, you literally just have issues with people telling you how you should refer to them. I wanted to talk about something that's a little bit more serious. I know, right? We're talking about politics in this channel, in this stream, in this economy. We're talking about politics. As a vtuber, but I saw something. You know, Trump had his meeting with the president from El Salvador, and there was like one part that people didn't really talk too much about. Just listen to what Trump says to the concentration dude.
And you know, some are bad because they're sick. They're mentally deranged. They're bad. Then you have to take them. If you're going to have a country, you're going to have to take those people out.
So he basically says that, like, some of the people that he sends to the gulags or wants to send to the concentration camps, to the torture camps, are those who are mentally ill, who are mentally deranged. And it's kind of funny because, like, he insists that anyone who's like critical of Trump has like Trump derangement syndrome. So he calls all of his critics mentally deranged, and he wants to send deranged people to El Salvador. He also insists that trans people are mentally ill, and he wants to send mentally ill people to El Salvador. He insists undocumented migrants are criminals, and he wants to send criminals to El Salvador. Like he covers that up with like, oh, it's just deportations, but in reality it's just like people who didn't commit a crime, mostly just overstayed their visa, who are members of the society, who are contributing to the American economy. They're being sent into prison camps. He doesn't want to send back the dude that has been like wrongfully sent there because he had like an autism awareness tattoo. They don't really care. They just like send everybody to El Salvador into like concentration, into like torture camps, and nobody cares because people are like so desensitized. They heard the lie that like, oh, trans people are just criminals, trans people are just predators, etc. Oh, undocumented migrants, oh, illegal aliens, they're a threat, they're a danger. Oh, anyone who's like critical of Trump is just radical lunatics. Like, that's how dehumanization and demonization works. At some point, you just stop caring what happens to them. Because, like, who cares if a sex offender gets, like, unalived in prison? If a pedophile, if, like, a child gets like beaten up in prison, oh, who cares? That's just what happens. But like, they're like still people, and the problem comes when you treat trans people, undocumented migrants, MAGA critics, if you like call them terrorists, if you call them deranged predators, criminals, if you think that like being trans is like a offender, and then you send them into a torture camp and nobody cares because it's like sending bad people there, right? They're not actually going after the good people, they're sending bad people there. So who cares? And that's why we talk about a genocide. Even being delusional, which is also what trans people are being accused of, is enough to send them to concentration camps. It's the same with like all the people who are like insisting on like bringing asylums back, etc. Like, who do they want to send there? Anyone who doesn't fit the cishet normative. Anyone who goes against the regime. Anyone who goes against the status quo. Because they insist that, like, in order to build a successful society, everybody needs to be exactly the same. If you build a wall, every brick needs to be exactly the same. Otherwise, you're not building a stable wall. Anytime there's a brick that is, like, different, that scares them. It makes them feel like this entire construct that they're building is falling apart, is becoming brittle. And like, who cares? Who cares about evil terrorists? Nobody cares how like terrorists are being tortured. But like, there isn't really a good definition for what a terrorist actually is. Like, these people are calling people who vandalize a Tesla and draw like a schmazi symbol on it terrorists. But then a trans woman gets murdered and they celebrate. They think the guy is a hero. That is the problem. That's where like a lot of issues come from. When we talk about like, oh, trans people don't have the same rights, it's always like, well, you don't deserve those rights anyway. You don't deserve to be viewed as a a normal, decent human being. You don't deserve the benefit of a doubt. You don't deserve to be heard. You don't deserve to freely express yourself because you're different, and you don't deserve those rights that we have. Like, that's what these people are doing to us. And anytime you speak about like, oh, you know, trans people don't have the same rights, trans people are like being prosecuted and or like persecuted. Trans people are denied access to healthcare that prevents them from unaliving themselves, that gives them hope, that gives them a reason to live. And these people are like, you don't deserve that healthcare in the first place because I don't agree with the experts. So like, what right is actually being taken away if I don't think that what you are experiencing is actually a right that you should have? Like, the thing that you're missing out on is not really a right to me, because I don't think that what treatment is necessary for you is what you deserve. So that's why there's like such a huge disconnect anytime like you try to communicate with these people. And like, we need to speak up, we need to like speak out and have our voices heard, etc. But it's just like so difficult to like reach the average person. As someone who grew up in Germany, who had a lot of talks about World War II, we never really talked about like how everything started. We never talked about like how they came for trans people, gay people, disabled people. It was all just like deviance and life that is unworthy of life. We never had like mentions of like how Hitler went after communists and socialists, etc. Like people who are critical of them. In our parliament, there's like a wall of names of everyone who stood up against Hitler, who then lost their life because it was already too late. It's just insane because like, you look at the situation in the US and you think of like all the similarities, and people are just like, oh, you're just fearmongering. Oh, actually, by calling them these, you're downplaying what Nazis did in the Holocaust, and you're making things look worse than they actually are. You know, there are like so many creators who are just like either in deep denial, or they're literally just stupid, or they're actually like supporting what is happening when they're saying things like, oh, I don't think people's lives are actually being ruined. Oh, I don't think anything is going to change under Trump. Like, the problem comes from you're not affected, and you rather listen to the abusers, to the oppressors, to the people who are in positions of power than the victim. I don't know if you're like scared to like stand up to what is happening, if that is like the thing. If you stand up, you're also going to be a target. Like, when I see people who are just like, I'm just apolitical, I'm a centrist, I just listen to both sides. I feel like leftists are just as bad as right-wing extremists. It's just people who are either not understanding the situation, or they're literally siding with the abuser, and they think they have like a moral high ground by just like taking the middle path. But like, if you take the middle path, if you're just like a fence sitter, you're basically enabling oppressors, abusers. You know, when trans people are speaking up and they're like pointing out the hypocrisy and like the flawed logic, etc., it's just like, oh, you trans identified men and women, you're just freaks. Why should anyone support your delusions? You should go into asylums. You should be locked up. It's insane. And the fact that that is like the current sentiment in like 30 to 40% of the population, and pretty much like when it comes to everyone in positions of power, it's scary stuff. And like, yeah, it started with trans people, started with disabled people, started with gay people, then expanded to Jewish people, to communists, to critics, to socialists, etc. Like, it will negatively impact you, even if you're not part of any of those groups. You also remember you mentioning about the Institute of Sexualwissenschaften in a video I did. Trans people are just the first stepping stone for them. Oh yeah. I mean, like, they are not making it a secret. They've just been like pushing the line over and over again. Like, it started with like, oh, keeping the men who pretend to be women in order to gain access to female spaces out of those spaces. And it just like expanded from them. Like, they always kept pushing the line, changing the definitions of things and associating bad things with just normal people. You know, it's the same with like calling trans people groomers for just existing and being trans. Magnus Hirschfeld was in favor of a trans person, of a trans passport 100 years back. He was like a trans medicalist. He didn't differentiate between like sex and gender, and he thought that like if you want to be a woman, you need to be like castrated or something. You know, I mean, like that's kind of what it all started with, like the mass sterilization of like gay people, disabled people, trans people, etc. The problem is just like we know the game. We know what is going on. We know what happened. But like people don't listen to us. People have been ignoring the warning signs for a really long time, and it's really bad right now. It's awful right now, and I was hoping that it would never get this far. I thought when they revealed like Project 2025 that this is going to be like a turning point, because like they want to turn the US into like a Christian nationalistic society that is basically like similar to Schmazi Germany. They want to turn it into a dictatorship. I mean, Trump is already talking about like his next election. They're ignoring the Supreme Court. Democrats are useless. The only true politician that you have when it comes to like the left in the US is just Bernie Sanders. He doesn't even get like a platform from like Democrats. So it's just like, who is going to like fight for the peasants? Who's going to fight for the oppressed groups? But like in the US, there's just like no one, because like the Democratic Party is so right wing. Like obviously I'm scared for like what is happening in the US. Like I have friends and family there. But like I'm also kind of scared of like it being a turning point for a lot of countries, including Germany. The right-wing influence, the far-right influence is really strong there as well. We have a conservative party again that is like the majority vote. And the next up, the AfD, is far-right extremists. They're being paid by Russia. They're being endorsed by Elon Musk. Like the amount of AfD propaganda that I see in like Twitter ads is just insane. You read the coalition contract. Is that finally revealed? They're evaluating the self-ID law. Want to keep the rights for trans and intersex people. They're focusing on the effects on children and the youth. They're not mentoring like non-binary people. Non-binary people fall under the trans umbrella. Yeah, but like the problem is that like in the self-ID law, it is really bad for non-binary people. Our equivalent to the social security number, the last 3 digits determine if you're male or female. So like from 000 to 499 is male, and from 500 to 999 is considered female. So like when I had my legal name change and my gender marker change, like I got a new social security number. If you have the self-ID law, they still kind of want you to fit in like either or category. When you like look for the name, that you like have something that is for that gender. If you're like assigned male at birth and you want to be like a masked non-binary person, you don't want to go in hormones, etc., like you're going to have like a really hard time with the self-ID law. That is like my current understanding of it. They're also saying that like, so they're looking at like if you change your gender, your legal gender, how protected are women. I'm like really suspicious anytime people like push that. Obviously, you know, when you change your gender marker, etc., like if you want to have like the self-ID law, there needs to be like some form of like guideline, etc. Like you shouldn't be able to just like do whatever. But like cis men really need to like change their gender marker in order to invade women's spaces and do bad things? Like, I don't know. Not really. It's the same with like when it comes to like women's sports. It's like there are guidelines in place to like prevent like cis men from like invading women's sports and dominating there. You know, you have to be on HRT, etc. for like such a long time. So they are also checking that if you change your name, there needs to be a better way to like track the person. So like if there is public interest in a person and that person changes their name, there should be a way to like track that person, which is also kind of I don't know if these things should be like easily accessible for people. So I don't know what they mean by reasonable public interest. They're back to pretending we're a danger to women. The self-ID law is what men use to do bad things to them easier, because every trans person is apparently MTF. Yeah, that's what I always think think is like so problematic with that. We're looking at the protection for women. It's like, if you want to protect women, protect them from cis men, not from trans women. Can you imagine that they are going to like start checking how trans are you? Well, you don't look like a woman enough, so like you shouldn't be able to like access these spaces. But it's like, if you don't really pass, a lot of trans women don't even go into like the women's restroom, for example. Like, it took me a really long time for me to have like the courage and self-confidence to be like, oh, well, I fit in enough to go pee in public restrooms. It just shows me that these people don't really talk to trans people before like making decisions about trans people. And that is like really scary, because that's what led to the trans law from the 1980s in general. Because like the people who made these decisions were like the remainders of the ones who had like the rhetoric indoctrinated into them. I had to go to court, etc. I had to go to two psychologists in order to prove that I'm like trans enough, etc. That I'm not like a threat, that I'm not delusional, or that I'm not schizophrenic, etc. So it's just like, it's not even doing the bare minimum. And then people look at that and they see trans people still complaining about what is like happening and like pointing out what is wrong with all these laws, etc. And people are like, well, you already got so much, why do you keep pushing it? It's the same with like when gay people had like gay marriage finally protected by the Supreme Court in the US. People being like, oh, you already got gay marriage, why aren't you happy with that? Why do you keep pushing? Why do you want to now invade our video games? It's like, why do you want to be seen as a part of society? Why do you keep pushing it? You already can do whatever you want behind closed doors. Nobody actually cares about gay people. It's just you are pushing yourself into our faces, and that's why we don't like it. We gave you breadcrumbs. Why aren't you happy with that? Why are you still whining? Why do you still want more? Can't you have enough? You don't even have gay marriage everywhere, not even in the US. Yeah, like there's still like discrimination. It's the same with like actually treating women worse than men is actually against the law. So if you say that you've been discriminated against at the workplace, that is actually not true, because misogyny rarely happens, because it's against the law at this point. It's just privileged people not listening to the victims and instead just like siding with the abusers because they don't want to hear us out, or they don't like, they invalidate our experiences, etc. If you didn't exist, then cis men couldn't exploit it. Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing that like TERFs are like pushing when we like point out, hey, you know, this law, this bill that they are introducing in the US right now would allow random people to inspect the genitals of young girls in order to determine whether or not they are allowed to compete in sports. And people are like, well, if you men wouldn't pretend to be women, that men wouldn't have to do that in order to protect women. And it's like, you are so brainwashed. You are literally some form of like Stockholm syndrome going on, where you just like side with the oppressor because you've been abused by them so much. And you think that like all the harm that is like being caused because of those oppressors are actually the fault of like another minority. So that's basically like the rhetoric that they are pushing, and it's just so dangerous, because like they don't want to listen to us. Like all the warning signs, all the red flags, everything that is going on, everything that trans people want the general public of is happening, and it's going to get much worse. But instead of being like, you were actually right, okay, let me fight with you, they're like, no, actually, it's a good thing that you are being brought to justice. Finally, people are no longer putting up with that pronoun nonsense. And it's like, you literally just have issues with people telling you how you should refer to them. That is your issue. Imagine your name is Elon and everybody calls you buffoon. When they speak to you constantly, they call you buffoon. They insist your name is buffoon. You're just buffoon. That is what you are. Everybody's like calling you that. And it's like, well, actually, your name is Elon. It's kind of weird that people insist that your name is buffoon and people refer to you as that. And like with pronouns, it's like, You put pronouns in your bio so people know how to like respectfully talk to you about you. It's just making things easier instead of people assuming that everybody on the internet is he, him, and making things like worse for women, femme-presenting people, non-binary people, etc. You check their profile. I see the pronouns. Okay, I now know how to like refer to you. It's just so easy, and that is like their whole issue. It's like instead of letting other people assume for you and insisting on calling you something that doesn't resonate with you, that's like not your name, that is not your set of pronouns, etc. That is their problem. They have issues with people identifying themselves instead of letting other people determine who they are.